What if you were able to sit down for lunch with some of the greatest leaders in the world? What would you ask? What would they say? Welcome to the Linch with a Leader podcast, where you're invited to join us in learning the spiritual principles behind big success. Here's your host, Mike Linch.
You know, there's some phrases that you hear that you forget. There's other phrases that you hear you never forget. One of those phrases is, the night is normal. And that's what we're going to talk about today on this episode of Linch with a Leader. If I've never met you before, it is an honor to welcome you on this leadership journey as you and I are seeking to be the leaders that we were created to be in the spaces and the places that God has put us. And today in episode 239, I get to sit down with an amazing leader named Dr. Alicia Britt Chole. I was introduced to Dr. Chole through a great friend, Brad Lomenick, at his family gathering where she stood up. She maybe spoke for 10 minutes, but what she had to say was powerful. And she uttered a phrase that day, the night is normal, that I've never forgotten. That phrase came from her book, The Night is Normal. And I am telling you, I have probably given out that book to more people than any other book that I can remember in a long, long while, because everybody walks through nights and we always feel like they're not normal. But that's Dr. Chole. And you learn some things about her. I heard one person say her voice is soothing and her messages are piercing. She and her husband run a retreat center. She is a coach. She is a person that comes alongside some of the best leaders in America and is that voice of thought and that voice of wisdom. She went from not knowing or believing in Jesus to meeting Jesus in a radical way. And now her faith now shapes everything that she does. She holds a doctorate in ministry studies and leadership. She is an author. She's an amazing guest. I'm just telling you. I don't know if you're a male. I don't know if you're a female driving into work right now, but I'm just going to tell you what Dr. Chole has for you will mark you. It will challenge you. And this conversation will help you see that sometimes the worst things that you're walking through, God will bring the best results in. Why? Because the night is normal. Nights happen in all of our lives. The question is, what do we learn from them? How do we grow in them? And what do we do with them? And that's what we're going to talk about in this episode today. So I don't know where you're listening from. I don't know what you've got on your calendar agenda, but I want you to do me a favor. I want you to grab something to write on. I want you to pull up a chair. And I want you to listen in to my conversation with the Dr. Alicia Britt. Well, Alicia, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Linch with a Leader. It is such a joy and honor to have you.
Thank you. It's a real joy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, I heard you a couple months ago at a great event with a mutual friend of ours, Brad Lomenick, and I just fell in love with your work, fell in love with your spirit and who you are. Tell me about Alicia growing up. I know you now. Tell me about you growing up. Where did you see life taking you as you grew up?
Mike, I'm going to pause just for a moment. Something has happened on my end. I'm so sorry. There we go. I apologize.
No, you're good.
Okay. Growing up, well, I always, as a young girl, I wanted to be a lawyer. That was the complete plan. I was going to head to law school. Then I wanted to loop back around. And after practicing for a while, I wanted to get a master's in computer science and be kind of on the front edge of computer law, and eventually wanted to enter office. And the big dream was becoming Secretary of State. So that was the plan as far back as I can possibly remember. I've always been a question asker. My parents tease me that the very first word that ever came out of my mouth wasn't ma or dad. They say it was why. And so I've been asking questions since I could speak, and not much changed. But it was unanswerable questions and unanswered questions that led me very early on to the belief that there was no God. I sincerely believed that God hadn't created mankind mankind obviously had created God because there were just so many questions in life that were never going to be answered by science or reason or experience. So it was completely understandable, had nothing but mercy for all those people who had fabricated some kind of belief system to help fill in the blanks for things that they couldn't understand. So personally, I considered myself a realist, a fierce realist who preferred unanswered questions over fairy tales. So I chose atheism as a belief system very, 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 very young.
And your coming to meet Jesus was a very interesting experience because you had some very unlikely characters that played a
Yes.
role in you meeting Jesus. Share that, because I think it's such an encouragement that God uses everyday people to do
Yes.
extraordinary things. Tell that story. It's so good.
Yes. Well, we moved every year because my dad was always chasing a dream. He was a visionary and he always had a new plan and a new business and a new business partner. And my junior year in high school, him chasing his dreams landed us in a brand new city, a brand new school. And there were these two young women. I'd never met an atheist. Both of them had grown up in church all their life. It was the Baptist pastor's daughter and the charismatic church's deacon's daughter. And they just felt like they were called by their God to befriend the new girl. But the new girl was rather argumentative. The new girl liked to debate. And once I found out they were believers, which, took about 1 minute, I think they introduced their names and then explained that they were Christians as though they were supposed to get some kind of cookie. I asked them, I said, thanks for being so forthright, but were you expecting some kind of reward?
That
What
is
is it
so
exactly
good.
that you were looking for? So that actually began an unlikely friendship. I debated them into tears. We were a little unmatched in skill. And sadly, on this side of eternity, what it takes to win a debate isn't necessarily truth. Skill often triumphs.
Yep.
And so we were a little unmatched in that department, and they were brilliant young women, but they'd never had their faith questioned. And so our discussions and our debates would end in their tears. And then from their tears, Mike, they would say the smartest thing they possibly could have said. They would say, I don't know, Alicia. I just don't know. I don't know the answer, but I know that Jesus lives and I know that he loves you. And I don't know is a brilliant answer when it's true. And every time they said, I don't know, it inspired my confidence in them as people. Answers really aren't what propels someone like me into faith, but authenticity, sincerity, and their love. They kept loving me as long as their parents allowed. I was a dreadful influence on both of their lives. And so eventually their parents started shortening the exposure they had to Alicia. But what was happening is that they were giving me the gift that I really needed. And I normally refer to that as the present of presence. They were giving me what Jesus had given them. Jesus had given them himself, and they were giving me their selves. And even though on a cognitive level, all of my interactions with them just confirmed that I didn't think people of faith had thought much through such faith. On a cognitive level, my atheism was as certain and solid and concrete as it ever had been. Inside, their love, their presence, was initiating a thaw. This present of presence was awakening something in me that I wasn't aware of and that they couldn't see. They felt like epic witness fails, like they should never witness to anybody for the rest of their lives. But it was after that, weeks before I was about to begin my university studies, I had pre-law, headed down that road. A friend's mother invited me to come and spend some time with them. And she kept inviting me to church with her. She said, oh, Alicia, would you just go? Just go this Sunday. Okay, how about next Sunday? Would you please just come this Sunday? And she never tried to debate with me. She didn't go for my head. She went straight for my heart. She kept saying the most ridiculous things like, oh, Alicia, my Jesus, he knows your name. And I thought, oh, for the love. I thought this was kind of a Texas-based phenomena. I didn't know these people were everywhere. But she was too nice to debate, Mike. She was too nice to yell at or to try to shred. She was just this lovely woman. And so finally it dawned on me that she was never going to give up. And for the rest of my days, she was going to call me every Saturday night, no matter where I lived, and beg me to go to church just once. And so I said, let's make a deal. I'll go to church once if you promise to never ask me again. And she said, deal. So I went with her into this, no disrespect, pitiful church. There was nothing of excellence, nothing that was remotely modern. It was this tiny broken down building with a bunch of broken down hearts. They had actually experienced a dreadful I don't know, split, conflict, something. And just the remnant in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, a dozen souls maybe were present. It was one of the last days that the building was even open. Mike, I had no idea.
Wow.
And I sat in the back row expecting nothing because I wasn't there to find a God. I didn't think a God existed. I didn't wake up with a dream inviting me to rethink my life or some kind of tremor in my belief system. There was no God to find. I was there to get rid of a Christian, and this was the shortest route. And so in the back row, expecting nothing, wasn't high, wasn't in the pit of despair. Life was good. These broken-hearted older saints stood up and started to sing. And the atheist in the back row, I had an encounter with the living God. Mike, it lasted, I don't know, the entire service, 60 minutes, 90 minutes. It was stunning. It was tangible. It was head to toe. It was witnessed by this dozen souls. I didn't fall out or pass out. I was still present, but I was no longer alone. And it was as though these waters started washing over me, through me, the presence of the living God. And I knew his name. I sat in the back row and I thought, shoot, but I did not say shoot. I thought I was wrong.
Yeah.
I was wrong. There is a God. I knew his name. I knew it was Jesus. And I thought, this changes everything. It has to. I'd never knowingly lied to myself before. I wasn't going to start then. If there is a God, if Jesus is God, it has to change everything. So I just said, I don't even know what you're asking, but if you want me, my answer is yes. And I began a new life.
So that's so crazy. Where would you be today if those two sweet girls hadn't have poured into you and this persistent lady hadn't have kept asking you? Where would Alicia be today? What would you say?
Yeah, my honest guess is dead and in hell. I was living a very reckless life and didn't make great, strong connections between choice and consequence. My amazing family did a tremendous job at loving me, and we also have generations of challenges that I inherited. Very confident. If I would have made it past college, it would have surprised me. I think I was just living too recklessly.
Wow. And I love that because it's such an encouragement to people listening today, because these weren't paid people who were paid to be a witness to a lost girl. They were people who loved somebody and became friends and just wouldn't quit on you. And what an encouragement to us in our faith of how God can use anyone, and he can use a broken down church with no lighting and no band and no beautiful landscape. But when those people show up and Jesus is there, anything can happen, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Such an amazing story. And you've gone on and just done so many amazing things. We'll have already hit in our intro, but God's using you in some big ways. I had never heard you. I knew your name, but I'd never heard you in person. And you shared at Brad Lomenick's event about a 10-minute talk. And it was about shadows, and it was about leaders, and it was about dealing with the side nobody sees. What led you to do that? And what led you to share what you shared that day? What would you say?
My husband and I, we have the joy of primarily being mentors. I do some writing, I do some speaking, but Mike, what Barry and I mostly do is we come alongside of leaders and provide soul care. 50% of them are in the marketplace. Doctors and lawyers and entrepreneurs and artists, and the other 50% are in traditional ministry. And so we have both been doing this for 40 years, regardless of what's been on our business card. We have always been investing. And then about 12, 15 years ago, we established a nonprofit for that purpose. So we spend our days walking alongside of leaders with the entire purpose of helping them not collapse from within. They're successful. Professionally, they're successful. But when you spend all of your energy watering the outer rings of your life, the interior can become very barren and brittle and vulnerable. And so that's where we partner with them. And so after 40 years, frankly, of watching people and walking with people and seeing the difference having intentional mentoring makes, and the heart breaks. I mean, Mike, we can't even go a week now without some beautiful soul who started really well, collapsing on a national stage. It's everywhere. And they're gifted. and they know their leadership strengths and they know their personality profiles. And I'm sure that they've had leadership coaching for a long, 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 long time. And yet the shadows of our strengths, if they aren't attended to, they deepen and darken to the point where we can lose ourselves in them. It is going to require great intentionality from all of us to finish well. And so I speak from the heartbreak of watching beautiful souls. Now, thankfully, for most of them, that's not the end of their story. For most of them, they still have breath. For most of us, we still have breath. All of us stumble in many ways. And when we are serving successfully, whether it's in the marketplace or the ministry, when we are serving, well, I shouldn't say that. For me, I believe that all of us are called. It's just a matter of where we're called to.
That's right.
So,
Yep.
wherever it is we are called to serve, when we are serving successfully, but there's an area in our life where we're sinning willfully, it is a mercy for us to be exposed. It's a mercy to be caught. It's a mercy to fall, because to hear Jesus's rebuke means we still have time to heed Jesus's rebuke. We still have time to finish well. And so God's mercy can carry us all to the finish line. So I speak from heartache. And
is there... No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I believe from the errors that have layered that make it harder than ever for us to address these things before they cause a collapse.
Is there a common engine light that leaders should look out for? That, our check engine light comes on when our batteries are getting old, or our engine's overheating, or it needs water, it needs oil, whatever it is, and we have a little check engine light comes on. Is there a check engine light for leaders that they should pay attention to when this is beginning to develop on the inside of them and nobody else sees it but them? Is there any things they should pay attention to?
Yes, there's probably several. The ones off the top of my head, one would be that when we're giving counsel, we no longer heed. When we have a real trouble being silent and still with ourselves. When we keep stuffing with another dream and another great project and another great vision to keep in motion. When we get still and when we get silent, our emotions have a chance to catch up with us. And that's where a lot of self-awareness awaits. So whenever people just always seem to have a new dream, a new vision, God bless the visionary, but there's also stillness and solitude that helps us be true. I think that when we blurring the lines between emotion and devotion, when we measure our spiritual health through the presence or absence of emotions and feelings and experiences, that's a warning. I think that when we become easily offended by people challenging us, even if they're wrong, by people attempting to correct us or offer a critique, when we become hyper responsive to that, that's a warning sign. But when I look at personally, I think the greatest danger is one that we often can't see. I think when I look at systemically healthy leaders and systemically unhealthy leaders, and I use the word systemically because I think they're choices we make that help us gather momentum toward continued health. No one is always healthy. And every once in a while, Saul dances with the prophets, right? So systemically healthy, systemically unhealthy. At the very core, I often find that a systemically healthy leader leads because they already know their love. And a systemically unhealthy leader often at the very core leads to be loved.
Man, that, it's so funny when you enter leadership and God begins to use you, use a person in whatever industry they may be in. And I totally agree with you. I don't think there's a sacred and a secular. I think everything is sacred and
Absolutely.
Everybody's at work for the Lord. I totally agree with that. So whatever industry we find ourselves in, the enemy never takes a day off, does he? He never. If you could sit down with a leader and say, here's what I wished you knew about your adversary. Here's what I wished you knew about the one who is plotting out the way for you not to live out God's best in your life. What would you want them to know?
Yes. I think I would say that Satan's goal in your life isn't pain. His goal is creating distance. His goal is creating distance between you and God, you and those who bring out the best in you, and you and your true self. to create some kind of gap between who you really are and who you present. I had a brilliant soul in the marketplace that I was mentoring. She pushed back on this principle once. She said, Alicia, you always talk about pain as an unexpected friend. And she said, but Satan's goal is pain. So how can it be a friend? And I said, I'd like to reframe that if I could. I don't think Satan's goal is pain. His goal is creating distance. And toward that end, he can use pain or pleasure equally.
That's right.
Toward that end, he can use success or failure equally. I don't think he gave a rip how great that fruit tasted in Eden. And I don't think he cares at all how tasty the fruit we're tempted with today is. His goal is creating distance. And so what in your life is helping him succeed in creating distance between you and God, you and those who bring out the best of God in you, and even you and yourself? If all of your life, all of your thought life, all of your hidden life were suddenly projected onto a stage in living 3D, what scenes would you be ashamed of? Well, there's a gap. There's some distance. His focus is creating distance. Because once we cooperate with the distance making, then we have intentionally chosen momentum toward deception.
How do you protect yourself? Because the larger your platform continues to grow and the people out there that know Dr. Alicia Britt Chole, the greater the temptation for distance to be created between who you are and who God created you to be. What are some mechanisms you've put in place in your life to go, I don't want to be who I'm helping now. I don't want to be sitting in that seat one day. What are some things you've done to protect yourself?
Love to share, honestly, my favorite tool that I share with anybody, and it's probably been, apart from lingering and letting the Word of God dissolve inside of me, this tool has been the most practical and proactive in my spiritual toolbox. I call it life in the plural, Mike, and I'm not talking about pluralism, but life in the plural. And here's what I mean by that. God is with us. It's our theological reality. Jesus said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Hebrews 13, I'm with you. Oh, I'm sorry. Hebrews 13 says that he will never leave us, he will never forsake us. Matthew 28, I'm with you always to the very end of the age. And so Jesus with us, Jesus in us, is our theological reality, which means that faith is a duet, not a solo. Faith is Jesus and I, Jesus and I, Jesus and I. It's not just I, because Jesus is always with me. And so what I mean by life in the plural is that I correct my thinking and I shift it from I to we. So I'm not doing a podcast with Pastor Mike. Jesus and I are doing a podcast with Mike. I didn't just go to the dentist. Jesus and I went to the dentist. I didn't just pay taxes. Jesus and I paid taxes. I didn't just pick up the not so great gift our daughter's dog left for us on the rug. Jesus and I picked up the not so. So it's this Jesus and I, a gentle pressure on our mind to continually theologically correct our thought processes. And it changes things. I would suggest that it changes everything. It changes our self. We can't wake up, look in the mirror and say, Jesus and I are ugly today. We can't yell at the driver in front of us and say, Jesus and I think you're an idiot. Get off the road. It's also intensely practical in times of temptation, because now I have to ask, there's a filter. Jesus, would you like the two of us to think about that right now? Would you like the two of us to watch that right now? Would you like the two of us to take that step right now? Jesus and I, Jesus and I, Jesus and I. Again, apart from the Word of God, the most practical and powerful tool in my spiritual disciplines arsenal, Jesus and I. And so one of the things that does, one of the things that aligning our thoughts with the truth that Jesus is equally present in every moment. I mean, a God who's infinite and a God who's omnipresent is equally present in every moment. There's not more of God in happy moments and less of God in sad moments. Our emotions are different, but his presence is not. And so what life in the plural and the confidence that God is equally present in every moment does is, first of all, it sort of levels all moments, because then being on a stage isn't more important than weeding my garden or doing homeschool with my kid or dealing with that problem at the board meeting or answering that email with that contentious soul. It levels everything, but then it elevates everything, because every moment is equally full of potential to intentionally be with him. I have friends that I've walked with and journeyed with, and the thought of life in the plural when they head into those planning meetings or those reviews with the boards or whatever it is, they picture Jesus right beside them. And it's Jesus and them at the table, because that's true. And so, number one, life in the plural, hands down. And that spills over into a ton of other things. When invitations come, it's not about metrics. It's about whether Jesus and I feel like it would please him for us to do it together. And so I say yes and no in ways that may not be logical to others. I would say another practice that's been incredibly important for both my husband and I is the carving out of silence and solitude, where everything gets to catch up. All the mess just gets to catch up, and I have to address it and journal through it.
You know, it's such a great reminder, too, and it really ties in with your book we want to hit on for a second, The Night is Normal, because he is with you. We just always assume he's with us during daytime hours, and when the nights of our life hit and the sun goes down and it seems like it is not coming back up, and we have the dark nights of the soul, we assume that's time God is taking off. That is not true, though. There is a purpose to the nights. Unpack a little bit of the story of the book, because it was such a great reframe for me to be able to share with people. No, the nights, not only do they happen, but they really are normal and they really are used. Talk about that a little bit.
Yes. Well, this has been 30 years of focus and study for me personally. I feel like The Night is Normal is my life offering. If there was one thing I hoped to do that the Lord would grant me time to do as far as offerings beyond my family, it was somehow to be a small voice participating in the choir that is trying to reclaim the night in the life of faith. So the night was one of the original residents of Eden. In the beginning, there was day, there was night. In the beginning, there was a greater light to govern the day, a lesser light to govern the night, which means that pre-sin, pre-fall, pre-curse, from the very, 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 very beginning, following God required day faith and night faith. And understandably, we prefer day faith. We prefer to see clearly and feel fully and well and confidently into a well-lit future. And it is true that faith glitters best in the daylight, but it grows depth in the dark. And so this reclamation of night faith is a passion that I have, especially for the next generation, because I think that they have sadly been set up for a much more difficult journey in rediscovering that truth. This, again, I'll repeat myself, the blurring of the lines between emotion and devotion, the emphasis on experience over relationship, the assumption that faster is better. These kind of premises lead us to wrong conclusions, hurtful, harmful, sometimes disastrous conclusions. And so when we do enter night seasons where we can't see clearly and we're hearing nothing and we don't feel great, and instead of walking confidently, we feel like we're just stumbling. When we enter the night, many are assuming it's because they've exited the faith. We enter the night and we assume that something has failed. Faith has failed us. We have failed faith, or our leaders have failed us. And so when you already assume you've left, you become vulnerable to being siphoned off into a funnel that frankly leads to apostasy. But the night is normal. It's one of the greatest mentors historically. Genesis to Revelation. God features night faith. Most of the writers of the scriptures were in some kind of night when they were writing.
That's right.
Night
That's
faith
right.
is prominent throughout the scriptures. And yet somehow our Western Christianity has relegated it to a back burner, has relegated it to an exception, has even relegated it to evidence of disobedience or a lack of favor in God. It's simply not reflective of the Bible's story, cover to cover. The night is normal. The night's a mentor. And within that night, there's treasure that's just too weighty to be held by sunshine.
You talk about the word disillusioned, and I thought it was such a great word to capture what goes on in people's lives. Why are we so prone as a believer to be disillusioned when the nighttime comes in our journey? I know it's going to come for you. I know it's going to come for my friends. I just don't want it to come for me. And when it does, why are we so prone to be disillusioned so quickly?
Yes. Well, I think in part, certainly not in whole, but in part, I think that we've tried to reduce the spiritual to the mathematical, Mike.
Mm,
I think we've tried to reduce faith to equations. If I do this, then God will do this. If I'm faithful, then no harm will come to my children. If I tithe, my business will succeed. And there's, there's blessings to generosity. And our
yep.
children do inherit a lot from parents of faith, but they still have free will. We write these equations. And so when the outcome doesn't line up with our if then, we have to find an escape hatch somehow. And I think that leads to so much disillusionment. What is the outcome of following Jesus, if not the cross in this life and resurrection in the next? When he
That's
said,
right.
come follow me, where exactly did we think he was leading? And I think that we thought he was leading toward 24/7 happiness, even though that is not what he stated. Our pastor here at home, Pastor Spencer, he said something the other day. It's one of his life messages, but he was talking about how we've been sold this gospel of happiness, that Jesus saved you because he wanted you to be happy, and that you need to find a job that just makes you happy. And he said, can I be really honest? My job doesn't always make me happy. It makes me sad as much as it makes me happy. He said his first funeral was a 17-year-old young man who'd committed suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Well, welcome to your calling. And so what exactly is the prize? And when our culture, when somehow we get shifted off of presence, that's what the cross did. The cross granted us 24 access to God himself. We don't have to go to a certain place. We don't have to sit in a certain temple at a certain time. Jesus is within us.
Mm,
And that's the treasure.
mm.
Being with him, that's the journey. But when we think it was happiness, those equations are going to fall apart very, very quickly in the midst of real life.
You talk about moving into despair. When we've
Mhm.
gone through that disillusioned season
Yes.
and we move into despair, when you have walked through those seasons, and you've walked your own journey, you've walked your
Yes.
own
Oh, absolutely.
night journey. You don't just write about it, you're living it and have lived it. What does despair look like for Alicia when you experience it? What goes on in your soul that despair is saying to you and through you?
Yes. I'm not a psychologist, and they would have a much more eloquent answer than I'm going to give. But I think that despair, when we move from disillusionment, which is the loss of illusions, the painful loss of illusions about who God is and who we are and who the church is. That's disillusionment. When despair tries to drag us down from that instead of us surrendering to love lifting us up, despair to me, Mike, speaks of the shrinking of hope. It's when that hopelessness starts to gain roots in my soul. When it hurts to hope. I had one mentor tell me, when hope goes to hell. That was her very concise summary of despair.
That's
I
a
thought,
good way to say it, though, Ben. That's a great way.
there it is. And it's the loss of hope. And I think that, again, that's why this work is so important. Because what was our hope? What exactly was the hope? Was the hope that anything we devote to God will succeed? Was that the hope? Was our hope in healing or the healer? Was our hope in provision or the God who provides? And I think back over the cancer journey for me, 13-year cancer journey. What exactly is my hope? I pray for healing, absolutely. I'm proactive in doing everything I can, but my hope isn't in healing. It's in Jesus. And I feel like when we're sliding from disillusionment to despair, we need to do some work to decide what it was that our hope was in, not just for, but in.
You have done such a great job. This book, I've probably recommended this book more than any book I've recommended in a long, long time, because it speaks it's so universal. There was a mentor of mine, he used to have a phrase, and the phrase was, that which is most personal is most universal. And it's true. This nighttime you've spoken about in the book is so universal. What have nights taught you about Jesus that daytimes never could have?
Yes. I think back to my first night, Mike. It was my senior year in college. And as a question asker, I had asked myself into a corner. I had, I think, overstretched in processing thorny theological issues for where I was developmentally. And I remember just the desperation, feeling like I was losing my grip on faith. It was horrifying, terrifying to have that sense. So one of the very first things that Jesus taught me about himself through the night came from a beautiful, true story that I had recently heard, like just a couple months before this experience. And a man had a little boy who always loved to feel like he was holding on to his dad, but he was tiny, and his dad's hand was big. And so this little boy used to always just rip his dad's pinky with all his might. And he was so excited that he was holding on to his dad, but it was a good dad. And so the dad would always wrap his big hand around his son's wrist. So boy thought he was holding on to his dad. Dad knew he had a grip on his son. One day they were coming out of some big box store and this truck came, flying out of nowhere. Evidently didn't see them at all. The boy did something he never thought he would. The boy let go in fear. But the dad had his hand around the little boy's wrist, picked him up and pulled him back to safety. And when I was at my lowest point in that first night, just weeping on a picnic table in an obscure park somewhere. And the Lord brought that back to my mind. And what I sensed, I've never heard God's audible voice, Mike, ever. It's, he leans my thoughts in his direction, normally when I'm opening the word or in worship or being silent. And I felt God saying, Alicia, I know you thought you were holding on to faith, but you're not your faith's author and you're not your faith's protector. I've got my hand around you. And I was so afraid of losing something. But what I found on that park bench was that God is the one who keeps my lamp burning. I was so afraid of failure, Mike. And that was at the heart of my first night. I was so afraid of failing that despair was starting to get a hold on my soul. And I cannot say that there's some eloquent paragraph that described what happened next. But inside, fear lost its strength. And it was almost like I pre-fell into God's priorness, that I didn't give myself faith in the first place. It was his gift, and he was guarding it. He was watching over it. He was watering it. He was protecting it. So I think that the nights, at least for me personally, have really addressed the stronghold of fear in my life. Fear of failure, fear of rejection. It's been a decades-long battle. But every single time I go through the night, I stumble upon another fear that was holding me back. And it dissolves. It dissolves. Not in some great philosophy, or it dissolves in his presence.
There's just some people that make you think. Dr. Chole is somebody who makes me think. Every time I hear her, and I've listened to her on many other podcasts, great podcasts and episodes, every time I read her works, she makes me think. She challenges me, she pushes me, and she does it in such a non-threatening way, in a non-offensive way, but yet it pushes your buttons and it makes you go, I need to look at that. I need to uncover that piece of my life. Am I leading from a shadow side that she talks about? So good. If you have not read The Night is Normal, you're going to have a night. And you're going to feel like it's abnormal. And you're going to feel like God forgot you. And you're going to feel like God is wasting you. You need to get it. It is so good. So if you enjoyed this episode, which I think you probably did because our content is so good, please share it with a family member, a friend. Put it on social, subscribe, do all the stuff, man. It would mean the world to me, not for me, but to get the word out to help other leaders be who they were created to be. Always leave ratings and reviews and all the things. But man, thanks for joining us today. Our next episode, we get to sit down with another new friend, David MacGyver. David is a great radio host in the Minneapolis area of some popular shows. David has also served as chaplain of the Minnesota Twins for many years, and he wrote a book called Looking for the One that is fascinating. And it's the story of how he gets up every day and how he wires his life to look for the one. Episode 240 is going to be another good one. It is going to be another good one, and I'm so glad to get to enjoy it with you. So thanks for joining us today. I don't know where you're at. I don't know what you've got on tap, but I want you to do me a favor. I want you to go love God today with all you got. Go love people with his passion, and go live set. Make a difference in the space and in the place he put you. And I pray you have a great one today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for listening to the Linch with a Leader podcast with your host, Mike Linch. If you enjoyed this episode, you can help more people hear it by subscribing and leaving a review wherever you may be listening. For full episode notes and more spiritual leadership resources, visit MikeLynch.com.